Driver's Ed by Carolyn B. Cooney, Chapter 2. Now, this piece, said Mr. Willett, is a love song, and therefore, dear chorus of mine, we will perform it lovingly. Concert choir regarded him nervously. The music teacher had an unfortunate tendency to embarrass them in public. We're going to choreograph this number. Not only will we sing, said Mr. Willett, but right here on the risers we're going to waltz the waltz, hug the hug, and kiss the kiss. He demonstrated his air hugs and air kisses in 3/4 time. 68 singers made various expressions of horror and revulsion. Mr. Willett, said Lark, trying to be normal. Mr. Willett jerked dramatically to a halt. Normal, he cried. Excuse me, Lark. In this room, in this gathering, did you actually use the word normal? Remy loved this stuff. Mr. Willett was always a bit player. Mr. Willett was always a bit player in a skit he wrote on the spot. She glanced at Morgan to see Morgan's wonderful, easy grin, but Morgan was mesmerized by the music folder in his lap, which in fact held his driver's manual so he could study rules of the road when the tenors weren't singing. Look around you, cried Mr. Willett. Do you see any normalcy lurking? They imitated him, scanning the room for normal people. In fact, said Mr. Willett, you students here at Eastline High don't need to worry if anybody gets into Harvard. You just hope 2 or 3 of you will be normal by graduation. He looked carefully through sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. Normalcy is so far out of reach for you people, I fear I shall have to narrow the field. He squinted and shaded his eyes. Aha, Morgan, come. Morgan Campbell, normal. Morgan's parents had far greater plans for their son than normalcy. They expected straight A's, brilliance in field and gym, leadership in student government, astonishing achievement in some unusual and fascinating activity, plus a clear complexion. Remy prayed to the God who restrained music teachers not to let Mr. Willett embarrass Morgan. Remy had a large selection of gods, each with its own specific duty in life. A god to protect her from the dark, a god to endanger Mac's existence, a god to make Morgan fall in love with her. The chorus was delighted with Mr. Willett's choice because Morgan was perfect and needed to be the butt of a joke. Mr. Willett took Morgan's cheeks in his hands and turned Morgan's head left and then right for the chorus to admire. Morgan was measurably taller and wider. Mr. Willett looked like a skinny shopper buying a big garden statue. Kid, proclaimed Mr. Willett in a huge, rolling voice, this is your year. I am going to make you normal. Nobody else here is going to achieve this pinnacle of success. Normalcy. Think about it, Morgan. Thank your lucky stars. The chorus went wild, stomping, whistling, cat-calling. Wave at the crowds, Mr. Willett instructed. Poor twisted little beggars. At least they have you to look up to now. Mr. Willett taught Morgan to wave like the royal family, swiveling from the wrist so as not to tire out the whole hand. Morgan accepted the applause with dignity. Remy quivered with wanting him. She wanted to be his girlfriend and get applause from him and be applauded by him. But he didn't glance at the sopranos on his return to his seat, and when chorus ended, she got swept up by Lark. The 2 girls arrived at Driver's Ed first. Remy was forced to sit without knowing where Morgan would be. Did you see the mailboxes? Said Jose. Christine nodded. Who's doing it? Mailbox baseball had swept the city. Hundreds of mailboxes had pinned trash during the night. Nobody knows, said Lark, making it sound as if she, of course, knew perfectly well. Chase and Morgan came in together, too broad to fit through the door. Morgan dropped back, and Remy's heart skipped, thinking of how much the boys had grown this year. Why couldn't Morgan participate in a bare-chested spectator sport? They must have been at it all night. It'd take hours to do that much damage, said Chase. He and Morgan yanked out chairs opposite Jose and Remy and dropped boy style onto their seats as heavily as elephants with broken legs. Good view. Thank you, God of true love. No, it wouldn't, said Taft. You'd have two guys in the bed of the pickup truck swinging alternately, and you could cover the city in no time. Were you in on it? Asked Christine. Certainly not, said Taft indignantly. Anyway, that's not how you play, said Kristen. It really is just like baseball. One person at a time swings, 3 strikes, and you're out. Vandalism was supposedly a boy's activity. Did Kristen speak from experience? This certainly put Kristen in a new light. Remy could not imagine herself smashing mailboxes. She would probably laugh hysterically the first time she picked up the bat, and then, of course, the god of her mother watching would descend and make it impossible to do anything even remotely bad. The god of her mother watching was very powerful. Lots of idiots go out and paint rocks with their initials, Lark said, or paint the side of bridges, or in this case, smash mailboxes. The urge for immortality, of course. Remy was surprised by this little speech. She took her eyes off Morgan long enough to check out Lark's smile. Small, stretched, a rubber band demanding to be shot. You know what I'm thinking, said Lark. The class listened. Lark usually had good ideas. Let's all take signs. I love signs. Let's make it a class game. I love signs too. I've got a bike path collection, said Chase. I've got 6 of them lined up on my wall next to my trophies. I'm on the bike team, you know. They knew. Chase could be very tiresome about his old bike team. I don't have any signs, but I've always wanted Weymouth Road, said Alexander Weymouth. She resembled her name, elegant and historic. She had golden blonde hair like Remy's, but long, swinging, and better. Weymouth Road isn't named for my family, of course. We're not from around here. She shook her head, amused by the concept of being from around here. Still, I'd like the sign. Alexandra swung her golden hair in Morgan's direction. Let's us get Weymouth Road this weekend, Morgan. Alexandra was gorgeous. Morgan was as crazy about her as he was about most girls. Alexandra wanted his company? He should have been thrilled. Instead, he felt panicky. I don't have a car, he pointed out. Lark laughed at him. Morgan's afraid of girls, Alexandra, said Lark. This was the kind of thing Star said to bring people to their knees and obey her every whim. I'm not afraid of girls, thought Morgan. I adore girls. I think of girls every waking and sleeping minute. Sometimes I even have to wake up in the night to think about them more. Alexandra left her chair and sat right in Morgan's lap. Morgan had no idea what to do. He couldn't flirt or laugh or even enjoy it. All boys are afraid of girls, said Lark. Has anybody actually heard of a girl having a date? This is a school for sick puppies, agreed Christine. Nobody dates. You hear rumors, but you never actually come across it. Alexandra wrapped herself around Morgan. If he blinked, his lashes would graze her chest. Less chest than Remy, but still a chest he was more than willing to graze. In fact, put in Kristen, the most that actually happens when two kids go together is that now and then the boy lets the girl go with him to a movie. The girls all groaned and nodded. The boys all listened carefully. They knew nothing. Last week, said Lark, I shouted at Morgan, Take me, Morgan, I am yours. Name your time and place. And Morgan says, Chemistry, 4th period on the lab table next to the Bunsen burner. I, of course, show up. Morgan, of course, skips class. The class laughed. Morgan blushed, even though Lark was making this up completely. Tentatively, Morgan moved his hands. Alexander gave him a half smile that could have meant anything. Remy was beside herself. How could Alexander move in so fast? It wasn't fair. But then Alexander was too beautiful for fairness to be in the picture. Remy would never have more of Morgan than hand-holding in the back of the driver's ed car. Morgan's hand crept around Alexandra while Remy prayed to the God of true love to make Morgan want her body more than Alexandra's. So, okay, said Lark. Tiny as she was, she had a drill sergeant's voice. Signs, our class activity, our own personal driver's ed special. Here's the rule: nobody gets a license without taking a sign first. Ah, right, said Chase. I'm in. I've been in for years, said Taft. You know Lighthouse Lane with the cute little wooden lighthouse sign? We've got 3 of them. My brother took it for his college dorm. They replaced it. My sister took that one for her college dorm. And when they replaced it again, I took it for my room. They all laughed, except Morgan, whose mind was on other things, and Christine, who said, "Cut it out. I'm dropping this class if you really start that. I'm not getting into trouble." "You just want an excuse to quit driver's ed," said Alexandra. "Don't be a flea bite, Christine," said Lark. "Nobody would get into trouble. Everybody takes signs." Mr. Fielding wandered in, and the conversation stopped for once. Mr. Fielding only represented authority and had not yet actually exerted any, but you never knew. "All right, class, Joanne, Carson, and Crystal will drive today." Since the class did not include anybody named Joanne, Carson, or Crystal, there should have been a pause, but nobody missed a beat. Lark, Remy, and Morgan leaped right up. Even though the same 3 had driven yesterday, nobody interfered. Instead, they high-fived each other and made notations in their notebooks. Driver's tests were already being scheduled. Mr. Fielding would actually escort to the Motor Vehicle Bureau kids who had driven only once. The class had placed serious bets on whether the single-time drivers would pass. Mr. Fielding headed out through the library, with Lark nipping at his heels like a small, ill-behaved dog, claiming to be Crystal and begging to be first to drive. "You be Joanne," Remy said to Morgan. "Wave to us, Joanne," said Taft, grinning. Morgan waved like the royal family, swiveling the wrist so as not to tire the whole hand. "Queen Joan, the normal," said Taft. Lark drove. "River Road," said Mr. Fielding. Morgan sat back with Remy, staring out the window because looking at Remy made him nervous. It was surprising how much country there was left and how close to the city it lay. Their city had become a cement amoeba, splitting endlessly into more cities. Enormous office complexes, huge tracts of housing developments, miles of strip malls. Nevertheless, the buildings and developments ended more quickly than he would have thought. River Road grew narrower, and the woods closed in. They'd had a dull and speedy autumn. Leaves hardly even turned colors, just made a brown exit from life. Morgan did not find the scrawny woods attractive. A square yellow sign was set diagonally on its tall metal staff. "Thickly settled," said fat black print. "Don't you love that?" said Lark. "You never see a thickly settled sign in town where it really is thickly settled. You see thickly settled out in the woods where it isn't settled at all. Never mind thickly." Lark counted driveways as she hurtled by. "There are exactly 4 houses here, so naturally the highway department throws up that desperately needed sign. Thickly settled." Morgan had certainly never given any thought to sign placement. He didn't now either. Queen Joanne, the normal. It made him laugh and want to wave at the crowds again. Thickly settled vanished as Lark whipped by, much too fast. She lucked out. There was no oncoming traffic, and she didn't careen off the road. "Thickly settled," Lark announced, "would be perfect in my bedroom." Morgan tried to picture a girl's bedroom in which a large yellow thickly settled sign would be perfect. His sister's bedroom was the only girl's room he knew, and he didn't know it well. Star killed people who went unasked into her bedroom, and she certainly never asked her brother there. Star had not quite left her Barbie and Ken stage, and the room was full of dolls and doll houses and doll accessories, with Barbie outfits hanging from tiny closet rods mounted in a pink-painted jog in the wall. "How will you get thickly settled?" Morgan asked. They had to be 5 miles beyond city limits. Obviously, nobody had a license, although Remy had a car. 4 months ago, when his 16th birthday arrived, Morgan had been absolutely, completely positive he would get a car. His parents were rich. They had a BMW and a Range Rover. He had dropped many hints of Miata convertibles. He wasn't sure he'd get the Miata, but he certainly knew he'd get a car. He was wrong. A VCR for his bedroom was their idea of a decent present. As if he ever wanted to stay in his room again. 16 equals cars! He wanted to yell at his parents. Give me a car! But he didn't. He rarely spoke to his parents at all. The years he was 13, 14, and 15, he could love them only when they were out of sight, especially his mother. Just being in the room with her made him crazy. He wanted to scream and swear and disobey, but rarely did. He stayed silent and waited until she left, or he could. Finally, this year, he could be out in the room with them. He wasn't talking yet, but he was close. He was now at the stage of thinking of things he would say to his father if he were talking to his father. Receiving a car would have been a good conversation starter. Now his hopes rested on the morning he got his driver's license. They hadn't wanted to start carrying expensive car insurance before he was actually driving, that was all. Or have in the garage the temptation of a car he couldn't yet touch. That's the plan, he told himself. Day of my test, I'll come home and find my own car waiting in the driveway. That new metallic red I like actually doesn't have to be red. Or a Miata. It just has to have wow factor. No clunkers, no wide bodies. Remy recrossed her legs the opposite way. Her jeans made an audible friction rub. Morgan stared at the jeans crossing. Talk about wow factor. The bolts are probably rusted together, said Lark. Morgan struggled back to the subject of signs. And I'd need help taking the sign off the post. Is she serious? Thought Morgan. She really wants a dumb sign? He could never tell when girls were serious. It probably really is thickly settled, Lark, Remy pointed out. The thick part is just hidden by trees. Probably the neighbors participate in neighborhood watch, and they'll be watching. They'll see you take it, and they'll write down your plate number. And then it's prison for Lark, said Morgan. But prisons are thickly settled. The sign could still be useful. Lark had a very small mouth, as if her lips had been designed for some other face entirely. She tightened her tiny lips into a pout. You don't go to prison for stealing signs, Queen Joanne, said Lark. It's a little itty-bitty bit of wooden paint. All you do is pay a fine. How do you know? Said Morgan, genuinely interested. Did Lark have experience at this? She had experience, according to high school rumor, at everything else. Joel and I used to take them all the time, said Lark. It's so fun. I've got yield and dangerous curve and no right on red and 3 sizes of arrows. And then Joel moved away and my parents wouldn't let me go to Atlanta with him. They had reached the end of River Road and were at the north entrance of the bypass. Lark merged perfectly into the southbound traffic because there wasn't any and headed back to the city. You were 14 when you went out with Joel, said Remy. How could you possibly have thought your parents would let you go to Atlanta with him? Because I was 14, said Lark. 14 is dumb and ignorant. Now, Morgan, I want that sign. I need thickly settled to round out my collection. Morgan did not know why girls had to chatter all the time. How are you supposed to have a decent daydream about the various wow factors of life when they babbled about their personal history? Morgan, said Lark, you're a good friend of Nikolas Buddy, aren't you? They were nearly at the exit for the school. Mr. Fielding gazed at the high, enticing sign of a Dunkin' Donuts. He was as separated from his students as if he'd gotten out of the car and gone for coffee. Morgan felt invaded. He had not been friends with Nicky for years, and yet Lark immediately identified his past. 5th and 6th grade had been spent playing with Nicky. Nicky was a year older, which meant nothing until Nicky entered junior high, acquiring friends from other parts of town and demanding to be called Nikolas. Nicky didn't play anymore. Morgan just annoyed him. Morgan was a baby. What a shock to find his friend wanted him to dry up and blow away. Morgan came back again and again for punishment, somehow believing that this time Nicky would want his company. Nicky did not. Nicky, now a high school senior, had a car. It was a heavy, featureless old Buick, the kind women who play bridge and men who sell office supplies might drive. But did it ever have an engine? That car could go. You could fit three in front because it didn't have a divided seat, and in back you could cram four if you wanted. Nicky usually wanted. The ultimate popularity test was to have a full car at all times to all destinations, so Nicky gave everybody rides, even Morgan. Morgan was ashamed to see how willingly he rushed back into friendship. He must have been hoping all this time that Nicky would let him back, as if Nicky were a secret clubhouse, and now at least Morgan could join. Nicky loved being the one with the license in the car. He might have been captain in the army, with the brightest uniform and the shiniest medals, and his passengers might have been slaves taken in battle, eager to line up and please the master. All these thoughts made Morgan slightly sick. He said to Lark, "Yeah, I know Nicholas, buddy." Lark's eyes were shining, and she tucked her lips in like sheets, as if keeping plans inside. "Do you think Nicholas would drive?" Remy knew what sign she'd take. Morgan Road. Wouldn't it be neat to have the street sign with the name of the boy on whom she had a crush? Of course, if Nicky Buddy drove, Remy wouldn't be allowed to go. Nobody's parents approved of Nicky Buddy, even though he was now called Nicholas, which sounded more reliable. But she couldn't take Morgan Road when Morgan was around anyway. Any boy at such visible evidence of serious crush would flee the country. Would Nicholas drive? When they were 10 and 11, Morgan Campbell and Nicky Buddy were in love with roads. They'd sneak out after dark, follow the road out of sight of their houses, and wrestle on the white line in the middle of the street. When headlights appeared, they had to dive for cover, as if oncoming cars were bombers in war. They could not hide like girls, protecting themselves, worrying about clothes, scratches, brambles, or broken glass. It was imperative to dive into the ditch without checking out the bottom. Extra points if you actually dove onto rusty cans or an old hubcap or a pile of sharp rocks and hurt yourself. Blood was good. He remembered his mother's exasperation at the torn clothes and the wonderful lies he told because you could hardly explain to your mother that your hobby was playing in the traffic after dark. Morgan and Nicky played chase, too. The point was that neither boy could slow down once the chase began. Not for anything. Not for fences or dogs, not for backyards or traffics, brooks or swamps. Morgan loved being the one who fled. He felt criminal, sick with the sense that if caught, he would be jailed or thrashed. It had a curious appeal, but he also loved being the one who chased, closing in on Nicky, knowing that in a moment he'd throw the other boy to the ground, that he'd be the winner and the power. Chicken and chase had faded away, their place taken by socially approved games like baseball and football. The swamps and the woods had vanished in the last few years anyway, infilled and built upon, seamlessly part of the vast new city. Memory came back, sweating and enclosing, as if Lark had tossed Morgan back into a soup of running and chasing, screaming and catching. "Yeah," he said, "Nicholas would drive."